Okay, hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
All right, so tonight we're going to talk about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is a movie that I told myself a long time ago I was just not going to see in the theater because it's an animated movie and there's so many other movies I need to see in the theater and there's other things that got to get done. But I kept running into people who said, "Have you seen Spider-Man?" And it's like people from work and just like, even like at church and stuff where they're like, "Yeah, have you seen Spider-Man?" Because they're like, "You like movies, right? Have you seen Spider-Man?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't seen it. Like, it's a kid's movie. I'll just wait for it to come." They're like, "No, you need to see Spider-Man." And I'm like, "Okay, all right." So we made it a point to go see it, and then we said, like, you know what, we're gonna do it on the podcast so that we can, get it. And I was kind of like, maybe get it out of the way or whatever. And then on top of that, it did get nominated for an Academy Award, like a bunch of other animated films, but was the one that kind of, I think, maybe stood out a little bit, especially for me. And once I started hearing from people like Justin Arner, who we've had on the podcast before, and other people at work who are, in our creative services department, and they were just talking about the style of the animation, that got me more interested than even like the plot necessarily, because I don't have the background, the comic book background that you have, and that other people who are, kind of like really deep into this have. But so learning about some of that stuff before I went in there, and then kind of knowing what to look for, I really enjoyed it. I thought I think it's a great kids movie. I think it really moves. It keeps you engaged, and I was excited to see it going in. And I was not disappointed. So what did you think about it?
Everything you just said, ditto. I had the same exact experience. Being a lover of movies and having a podcast and being in the theater and having a creative upbringing, you have people come into your life and they're like, "Have you seen? Did you see? What'd you think? Tell me, what should I see?" And every single person I've talked to recently about movies, "Have you seen the Spider-Man movie?" "No." "You, of all people, haven't seen the Spider-Man movie?" And I'm like, I can't see everything. And I had the exact same reaction, believe it or not. Even though I have a comic book upbringing, I just felt like this was one that I could probably rent and not see in the theater because there's so many other things at this time of the year. I don't know, something about it kept calling me, even though I just had a resistance to it. I don't know why, I just did. I can't define the resistance. And I thought, well, maybe the movie won't play for me like it's played for everybody else. Maybe it's just not one of those things that I'm going to like. Well, that was a little ridiculous to even think of that because it's, for an animated film, it's heavy and it's deep and it's got a lot of heart and it's got a lot of soul and it speaks a lot of different messages. It's a coming of age story. It's a 90% father-son story, which I'm starting to really believe that's almost in every single film, by the way. I just saw The Wife with Glenn Close, and I'm sure we'll talk about it during our Oscar podcast, but there's a father-son subplot in that. And I'm like, this movie is about this woman and this man. How all of a sudden have we switched into the 90%? So back to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, this is a 90%er. It's a father-son. It's an uncle and nephew story. It's a love story, but not in a conventional sense, not between a guy and a girl. It's a falling in love with who you are story. And I think that's one of the best types of love stories that's out there. And the animation is stunning. It's different. It's unusual. It's almost off-putting at first. Mm-hmm. That whole kind of red and blue. I actually walked outside and looked to see if it was 3D. Now I was walking with my back to the hallway so I wouldn't miss anything, and then I saw there was a receptacle for glasses, 3D glasses. "Please recycle." And I thought, okay, well, maybe they just forgot to give me. And I reached in and grabbed a pair, and it was in a plastic bag that was sealed. So I thought, okay, well, there's nothing weird about this because somebody didn't use these. And I walked back into the theater and I put them on, and the picture was flickering. And I was like, okay, obviously it's not 3D. It doesn't say 3D. It's not on my ticket. I just have to adjust to it. And then I realized very quickly that it was utilized. You know how when a filmmaker will blur out the person in front of the frame and then focus on somebody in the back. And then when they come to the person up front, as they they're pulling the camera up front, that person comes in focus and the other person starts to get blurred. I noticed that was being utilized as a technique, not only, I guess, to simulate what you were talking about, watching a live comic book, because that's what it felt like. It really did feel like you were flipping through a comic book. And I thought that they held back and restrained very much on the thought bubbles and the word bubbles and all of the meanwhile, or the whoa. They just did it in the right places to give you, hey, remember, guys, this is a comic book world. Even though you're now in it and you believe this world exists for what you're watching, at least I do because I have the best suspension of disbelief, you still are reminded every once in a while, hey, this is where the page would turn. And they did things to make you believe you were actually turning pages, not literally, but that's what it felt like. And it really did feel like sitting on my bedroom floor reading comic books. And sometimes I would just spread out my comic books and I would just stare at them and I would come up with my own stories, and they would be cross comic book heroes, Marvel and DC, and some newspaper stuff. And I would just imagine a whole bunch of different stuff inside these pictures. So actually I was in front of the curve when it comes to creating a Spider-Verse, because I did that in my own imagination. So it really literally felt like that when I was watching this movie. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. The other thing I noticed is that the texture of the clothing, it looks like bubble wrap, all those dots. I guess that's pixelated type things. Did you notice that the texture of all of the clothes kind of look like little circles?
That's all kind of like purposefully done. They're trying to replicate in the printing process when you do when they printed, and I've done some research about this, and you've noticed it before, I'm sure, when you even just picking up a newspaper or whatever. For people who've actually read newspapers that are printed on paper, I guess there may be some listeners who haven't ever picked up a newspaper and read it. Which is crazy. But so in the printing process, in color printing, you have the ability to print, you print with multiple colors, but you only use like 3 main colors and then black, and it's like cyan, magenta, and yellow. And then you have each of those plates, and you have to print each one of those plates one on top of the other, but you have to have something that lines all of them up. And if they don't line up exactly perfectly, then one, like maybe the cyan, like the blues off a little bit. And you saw that all over the place, especially mostly in the beginning, to kind of like get you. It kind of reminded me of the, remember when Grindhouse came out? And, and it was like Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, and they were purposely adding in, I mean, they shot it all digital, but they were purposely adding in grain and all that stuff to try to make it seem like that. And they really like heavily did that at the beginning of the film, but of each of their films. But then as the movie went on, they kind of like backed off a little bit to kind of give it a little bit more space. I think they did that same thing in this movie, where they were kind of focusing on getting you into this feeling of like you're watching a motion comic book, and that was a purposeful choice. The other thing they did I thought was really cool is they used these bin day dots, is what they're called, like the bin day like process of like printing. It was named after a guy named Benjamin Day, and it was done like way before comic books, but they utilized it in the 50s and 60s during when they were printing, so they could print on cheaper paper, and they could still get those same colors and shades, whereas they wouldn't have been able to do that if they didn't use that same printing process. But when you look really, really close at those comic books, you do see those like kind of like crossed dots, like dots on top of dots type of a thing, and you do get that feeling when you're watching the movie, especially. And I think you probably noticed it because it was those kind of more uniform colors on a coat or a big large, whether it's side of a building or a sign or something like that.
So do you think they did it in some places but not other places? Because I didn't see it in any of the skin tones, any of the actual characters' faces. I didn't see it, so it had to be purposeful that they let it be seen. And I thought it was cool because it let you know that there was textured costumes and textured cars and buildings and streets and trees and stuff like that. They had a real life effect to them because of that. I call it bubble wrap because it reminds me of bubble wrap. But yeah, I thought it was cool.
No, it is really cool. I think they did a good job of kind of riding the line of not going too far with an effect like that to take you completely out of the movie. It does give you that sense initially at the beginning where you're like, is this right? And then you just kind of fall into it. So I think that's It's a bold move, and I think that's it was a good move to, number one, to differentiate it from other animated movies that have come out in the past, because it is still, I mean, it's still an animated movie, and you got a, you know, a large field of animated movies, but it's pushing forward, and it's not doing it for no reason. It's doing it as kind of like an homage to comic books. So now you've watched some of the other like DC and Marvel, like Iron Man and those animated things, right? I mean, are they just pretty much like strictly basic animation when it's doing like Thor and Iron Man and Captain America and all that?
Yeah, I have. I prefer those. I love those. I love the Justice League series. I love. There was an X-Men series, the Uncanny X-Men, that I really liked, and I guess stylistically they're different because I guess the artists are drawing them in different styles, not necessarily in the same show, but different types of shows. There's a Batman show called Unlimited, and they've got all these kind of weird etchings on the costumes and all these weird kind of pointy things coming out of Flash's costume, and it's very angular and everything's very sharp. So stylistically, yeah, they're all different, but I don't think anything like this. There was I think it was a Japanese movie, and I'm not sure. It was an X-Men movie, and I'm not sure when it was made. I'd have to look it up. And that was more in the anime style.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have kind of borrowed from that in these recent animations, but usually they're just regular cartoon looking characters, but not like comic looking, meaning comical looking. They look like, you know, a 2D version of a drawing, if you will. I guess that is a 2D version. But yeah, so stylistically, I think they're different, but nothing like this that I've seen. I don't think people want that in those kind of things. Like, this is a specialized film that they created with the idea, and it's a great idea to do something like this because the whole universe is upside down. Actually, it's a bunch of different universes added together. And so you can step out of the box when it comes to styles and animation. But no, they're pretty straightforward. They're well done, and I love them, but not as artistically risk-taking as this film is. And it does definitely pay off in this film. It's an interesting looking movie. It just is.
Yeah, and we can talk about the different styles that they kind of like pay homage to when we start getting into the different Spider-Men. But before we do that, I wanted to talk about kind of the people surrounding the main character, Miles Morales, who's voiced by Shameik Moore. Who, have you seen Dope?
No, I haven't.
It's cool. It's a really cool movie. That's the only thing I've seen him in, but he's really good in it. And yeah, so he's the main character of the film, who gets bit by a radioactive spider, of course. He kind of goes through all this right after seeing Peter Parker die, the original Peter Parker in his universe die, who was played by Chris Pine, which I didn't realize. I mean, he has like, I don't know, one line or something.
I couldn't place his voice. He says a couple of things, but I was like, who is that? I can't place his voice.
Yeah, I couldn't either. But still, I thought it was funny that now we have like all of the Chris's, in quotes, have been in Marvel movies now. Because he was the main holdout. Because you got Chris Pratt, Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Pine have now all been in Marvel movies. And then you've got his dad is played by Brian Tyree Henry, which we will talk about next week. He was in he's first time I saw him was in Atlanta, but then he's also in If Beale Street Could Talk. He's in a lot of movies this year. I think he's in Widows, but I haven't seen Widows yet. I think I don't know, maybe that's coming out next week. He's been in a bunch of stuff recently. White Boy Rick, which I haven't seen. And he's going to be in Godzilla vs. Kong, which I guess they just shot. So, and he plays Miles' dad. And then his uncle is played by Mahershala Ali, Aaron Davis. And so, which is, once again, Mahershala Ali is all over the place too. But so we get those two main characters, and then he ends up meeting Peter Parker from the other universe, which is played by Jake Johnson, and Gwen Stacy, who plays Spider-Gwen, is played by Haley Steinfeld. So there's a bunch of people in this movie. Nicolas Cage plays SpiderMan Noir. And
He's
then
great.
yeah. Well, he only has a handful of lines, but I mean, I think it's kind of
He's
cool that
great.
Nicolas Cage is such a huge comic book nerd, and he's now in Spider. You know, he's Spider-Man, so that's or a Spider-Man, so that's kind of cool. I heard a story a while ago where, and I know he's had some issues with like being bankrupt and stuff. So, but I heard a story a while ago where like him and his son were like our big comic book fans, and he ended up buying like Action Comics #1, whatever the original Superman comic book was. It's like it was like the most valuable comic book in history, and he ended up buying an original version of that, years and years and years ago. So he's definitely a big comic book nerd. So it's cool to see him in this film. Catherine Hahn is Doc Ock. Liev Schreiber is they have him as Wilson Fisk, but he's Kingpin. He's Kingpin. I'm literally just reading through IMDb, but these are great actors, and they're all kind of offering up their services to this film. So it definitely helps out. And then they're all kind of like led by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Phil Lord has like a story credit and a screenplay credit, and so this is what they worked on and spent more time on after they got fired from Solo. I'm assuming that they were able to really, kind of help to put their stamp on this film. They didn't direct this film, but I'm sure they had, their producers, and I'm sure they had a hand into what it looks like. And I'm a huge fan of those guys, so it's good. I mean, I thought that's really cool. This is a great way to, bounce back from something like that. So I'm impressed with the, cast and crew, top to bottom. I thought it was awesome.
Agreed. Kingpin is like his superhero name, if you will, or his villain name, and Fisk is his real name. So it's like his, AKA.
Yeah, and is it normal to have? See, I'm just gonna ask like stupid comic book questions, I guess. Is it normal for the bad guy to have like a motivation? Because he does have a motivation in this film. Like the reason why he has that collider is so that he can try to get his family back. Because his family died, and so that's like, I mean, it's like, wow, they're actually, trying to humanize this huge guy who doesn't look like a human. He looks like a piece of toast in a suit or something. I don't know. He's huge.
He so looks like a piece of toast in a suit. But see, that to me is, you said it earlier, this film is bold. It makes bold choices. It sticks by him, and instead of drawing him looking like a realistic version of a comic book character, they drew him like they wanted him to look in their imagination. And that I can always appreciate. I like bold choices. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Not necessarily in this film, but in a lot of other things. But for me, I thought, well, that's how they imagine their Kingpin looking. And he is always enormously bigger than anybody else on the page. And yeah, villains have backstories like that. Mr. Freeze from Batman, his wife is in a cryo chamber and he's trying to bring her back to life. That's how he becomes Mr. Freeze. Dr. Ock's wife dies in the Spider-Man 2 movie, and that's why he goes crazy. So yeah, there's criminal motivation that turns Deadshot from Batman and Suicide Squad, and he's trying to get his life back together and get his daughter back. So yeah, there's always those backstories that kind of give you an empathy for the character, even though he's making horrible choices and he's a criminal and he's doing bad things. You as a human being can sympathize, maybe not relate and or think it's okay or justify, but you can sympathize and you can be or empathize with the person because they're twisted for a reason. So, and the thing that I like the best about that, we can get into it later on with the spoilers, but we'll go back to it later on. I liked how they handled that situation, and we'll talk about it later with the wife and the son and all that other stuff.
Yeah. But so that's the whole kind of reason why all these other spider people show up in Miles's universe, is because of the collider, and Jake Johnson kind of like, skips into that, his Peter Parker skips into that, and then all these other Spider-Men and women show up. It's interesting how they decided to kind of like break the fourth wall a little bit, especially with Jake Johnson Spider-Man, where he starts to talk about things like the TV show and the
I love
Spider-Man
that.
popsicle and all that
I
stuff.
love that. And they handle the dance sequence in Spider-Man 3. They make a
Yes.
comment about that. That was great.
But they show you before
That
they
was
do that.
great.
That's the rule of threes, where they show you the his first where he's stopping the train, and then he's got the upside down kiss, and then the third one is the Spider-Man 3 dance.
But did you notice that all of them are skewed just a little bit differently than what happened?
Yeah.
Later on you see him with two trains, and then you see Mary Jane is the one hanging down and kissing Spider-Man as Spider-Man standing up. And then, of course, in Spider-Man 3, he never danced down the street in a costume, and he also wears the black costume a lot more in Spider-Man 3. So it was neat how they incorporated those things into it, but made them their own.
Mm-hmm.
But you still knew it was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to everybody who might not have appreciated some of those moments in those films, and they become pop iconic moments. The kiss is huge. Everybody's trying to recreate it and stuff like that. And she said, Kristen Dunst said it was the worst experience of her life, not kissing him, but he was kind of drowning because the water was running down and he was upside down. He couldn't breathe, and all this water was around. We'll leave it at that. And she said it was just a mess. And she's like surprised that it made it to the film because it was so hardcore to film that. And it looks great, but she said it was ridiculous. She said it's interesting because she has such a love-hate for that moment because, everybody loves it. It's a great moment in that film, but she knows what the technicality to get there was. So it just kind of leaves a bittersweet moment in her mind. So yeah, they kind of, they made it their own. They didn't exactly copy something from our world. They made it their own. That's the difference for me, because if they had, shown a version of Tobey Maguire dancing down the street, it would have been more poking fun at him and poking fun at the film, when they're actually poking fun at the cultural reference of that film. You don't want to be mean, but at the same time, these things kind of have to be pointed out. So yeah, he did. He broke the fourth wall in the best way. It was really good.
Yeah, and it was also, he said in his universe, they made movies about him. It wasn't this it was like he's a real, it's just like in the universe of this movie where there was a real, same thing. There was a real Peter Parker, all that stuff. So I thought that was great. And then once they start adding in the other characters, I thought it was pretty bold for them to do the Spider-Ham thing, because I think that was kind of like a joke, I guess, in the comic books. And they actually had other like characters in that universe. But that's they were smart. They added him in last, the Spider-Ham character in last. And it was one of last in, first out things, I think. And he had the least amount of lines, I think, of all the characters. And he was just there for a little bit of, comic relief. But you've got the Penny Parker character, where that's kind of where in some of her scenes, she's controlling the robotic spider thing, spider mech. And so you do get a little bit more like anime inspired animation for some of her scenes. She was played by Kimiko Glenn, and she did a great job. And then obviously the Spider-Man Noir, which that looks interesting to me. Is it kind of like have you looked at any of those comic books? It's like a steampunk type thing.
No, I don't know anything about that. I don't know. I know that, see, I'm more of a DC fan than a Marvel fan. I know that DC did this Elseworld series where there was a comic book called, I think we've actually talked about it on the podcast, called Batman by Gaslight. And it was Batman in Jack the Ripper time. And actually they made an animated movie out of it. The comic book's better. So, they do these Elseworld things, but I don't know that much about Spider-Man and Marvel Elseworlds. I just don't. I just assumed that these were based on, I think I have seen the Spider-Ham. I think I've seen that character before. And I think I've seen Gwen before, but I don't know much about them or their backstories.
Mm-hmm. Well, and from what it sounds like, and just from the reading I've done, like the Spider-Gwen character, she sees Peter Parker die, and so that's what spurns her on to become Spider-Gwen, and so then they the other characters are there's other there's a I think the Noir Spider-Man, he sees some other guy, like it was like Uncle Benjamin die or something like that. I mean, it's very
Oh
very
yeah, they mentioned
similar.
that in the film. They talk
Yeah,
Yeah, they talk about that in the film because when the lead character Morales, when his uncle, well, spoiler, when his uncle, I guess we got to talk about spoilers now because
spoilers.
there's no
Okay,
reason,
we're
there's no
good.
way. I was gonna say when his uncle's demise, but that doesn't really, that says that anyway. When his uncle gets killed, that's when all the other characters explain that they've had that in their backstory too. That
Mhm.
that these are different, not necessarily parallel universes. They're different universes, but these similar things have happened to us that make us rise above,
Yeah.
which is a great storyline if you think about it.
No, yeah, it's great, and then they all get to kind of share with each other the the people that they've lost, and so that's one of the main themes of this movie is that it's kind of like, I mean, I think one of the themes that they talk about very specifically in this movie is anyone can wear the mask, and you get to see Miles do that. I mean, he literally goes into a store selling Spider-Man gear, Spider-Man memorabilia and suits and stuff for kids, and he takes it to the counter and confronted with Stan Lee in his last this was the last thing he ever did for Marvel. So this was, I mean, he voiced this character for Marvel a while ago before he passed away. So in his main point in there is that the suit always fits, and the other one other big theme is that anyone can wear the mask when it comes to there's no limit to a Peter Parker doesn't have to be a particular age, doesn't have to be a particular race, doesn't have to be a particular subset or a group of person. It's when you have those powers, you can enact change. So and then the other kind of theme is that everyone has lost someone, or everyone has gone through something, and so that's something that can kind of bring us all together. So I thought those were two cool, real, like serious things in this kids movie, and it's like it's a little bit deeper than just kind of like hey, let's go kill some people. So I don't know. I thought that was kind of cool. I haven't talked about Doc Ock yet, which I did not realize was Doc Ock until it was too late. And that's me like not knowing anything about comic books, or just my perception of like, oh, Doc Ock's a guy. Well, I guess after reading a little bit, it's like, oh, well, in the past Doc Ock has been a woman, so that's multiple times, I guess. See, I don't know how people keep up with comic books because there's too many things. Like I'm somewhat of a completist, and so having to try to keep up with all these things, like I don't know how people do it. I really don't. You'd have to buy like 20 comic books a week.
No wonder you don't like Twitter. It never ends.
It
There's
never
no
ends.
completion there. Yeah, yeah, I gotcha. Well, I mean, I don't think I saw that that was Doc Ock when you first meet that character. I like the fact that you don't know that, and I like the fact that you're challenged. But to me, it's, I mean, cross races, cross sexes, cross sexualities, they've always kind of blended together in the comic book world. I mean, yes, you have your titular characters who are certain type, but there's always been variants of those characters, and there's always been like a Wonder Girl, a younger version of Wonder Woman. There's a Batwoman. There's been a couple of versions of Batwoman. Some of them are very, very interesting. Um, there's a Batgirl. So there's just, it's not a surprise that they did something like that, but I was surprised because you are used to the character being male, but I thought it was great that, out of nowhere, because you do sense something from that character, because she's like, no, this is our collider.
Mm-hmm.
Like she says that, mean mine and yours. And what's the deal here? And so that she's, because at first you're like, why is this scientist working with him? Why, but scientists often work with people who turn out to be not who they seem to be because of scientific reasons, and they want their experiments done and paid for and all that other stuff. I like the fact that she wasn't that character, that she was like, wait, you're a bad guy, you big piece of toast in a suit, you can't possibly be a bad guy. She turned out to be a bad guy too.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because it's a surprise and it's kind of a twist, and it just means that anybody can be anything in these universes, like you were saying earlier, good or bad.
That's true. We haven't talked about like kind of his time before being a Spider-Man, and I did notice it. Did you notice that his friend in the school, or I guess his roommate in the academy, whatever that academy was, the school that he was going to, he did kind of remind me of the Ned character in Spider-Man Homecoming, and in doing some reading, that's actually based on that character. So they changed his roommate in Miles Morales' roommate in the comic books. His name is Ganki Lee, and that's who the guy is in this film. But he has the same the Ned character in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie, and I'm guessing in the new movie has a very similar traits to the character in this one. Now we don't really get to see him do much, but we do get that scene where he gets shocked when he finds everybody on the walls, and it's very similar to the scene where in Spider-Man Homecoming where Peter Parker's trying to make sure that he doesn't see him. So I don't know if that's an homage or if that's it, both of those scenes are from the comic books or what, but I thought that was kind of a cool little tip of the hat to that.
Well, doesn't Danny Glover play Morales in Homecoming? In the Tom Holland
Donald Glover plays Aaron Davis, plays the uncle of, because he talks about his nephew whose name is Miles Morales. So
that's right.
He does play Aaron Davis, which opens him up, I guess, to be the Prowler in subsequent movies.
There's been like this ridiculous blogs about that.
Really?
And that, oh yeah, people just have speculated and what's the deal, and does that mean that what I say, Danny Glover? Damn it, I hate when I do that. Donald Glover. No disrespect, people. Just sometimes my brain and my mouth does not work, and if you've heard this podcast, you already are aware of it. So anyway, apologies to two very great men. So yeah, there was a whole bunch of talk about Donald Glover being the next Spider-Man, or if he was going to be the Prowler, or any of that stuff, and going back and forth, and how much of it was Easter eggs, or was it just a coincidence? But there is no such thing as coincidence when it comes to introducing a character in especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a reason for everything, and maybe it's sort of because they knew this was coming and they knew that they needed to introduce different types of characters. I don't know, because the Scorpion is introduced he's one of Michael Keaton's henchmen.
Yeah, one of the Vulture's henchmen. You're right. And he gets knocked out of the group. Yeah. That's right. Donald Glover is actually in this movie, but it's a clip on a TV in his uncle's room as he's walking in for the first time. There's a clip on his TV of one of the episodes of Community where Donald Glover's getting out of his bed at the beginning of an episode, and he's wearing full like Spider-Man pajamas, and that was a real thing in a Community episode, and that is referencing this kind of like a push for Donald Glover to be the next Spider-Man when they were casting the Spider-Man that Andrew Garfield ultimately got. So that was like from 10 years ago or something, 9 years ago. So, I mean, that was from a while ago. So Donald Glover's been in this Spider-Man conversation, or at least been a Spider-Man adjacent for a decade almost. So it is kind of neat how they incorporated him into Spider-Man Homecoming a little bit. And now he's, there's a little bit of a tip of the hat to Donald Glover in this film, especially in the room of the character that he plays in the live action version. So that's kind of cool. Another thing I noticed, just real like weird small things you notice every once in a while, it was the number 42 kept coming up. And the first time I saw it was on the spider that was like crawling on his arms and neck and stuff. The spider was from this
I did notice
Chemtex
that.
or whatever company that irradiated these spiders. had like numbers on in the individual spiders, and that spider had a number 42. And after Miles got bit and Miles was trying to jump around and swoop around and stuff in town, he ended up like falling, hitting a sign and falling down onto the pavement, onto the sidewalk. And next to him were two numbers from a sign that he hit, that he knocked down. And there was a 4 and a 2. And there's like all these other kind of like little things that started, popping up. And I was like, there's got to be some sort of a thing to that. And I think there is in the Spider-Man lore some instances of the number 42, and in other comic books instances of the number 42. But it's that little stuff that I think that once you go back and see this, or if it's like something that's on the background, you got a kid that's watching it like 24 hours a day, they're going to start picking that up, or people will start picking that up the more they see it. And I think it's really neat that with an animated film, they've got the time to spend on putting these little Easter eggs in there, and you can just constantly keep pulling things out of it. So I thought that was really cool.
Well, isn't there a story? What is the story about? A scientist puts into this mega computer, what's the meaning of life? And the answer comes
you're talking
out
about
42?
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's the answer to
Yes, thank you.
What's the answer to the meaning of life and everything, all that? Yes. That's and that may be where the people in the comic books, started peppering that in. But I've done a little bit of reading on it, but it seems to be there are references to the spider coming from another dimension, possibly, and there's all these other things that you can get into, but I don't know. It's little things like that I thought was pretty cool, and ways to kind of like dig into something that maybe there's other 42s that I haven't noticed, or even that a bunch of people haven't noticed. Maybe I don't know if anybody on Twitter's noticed it or what, but it's neat to kind of go through and start to dissect a film like this. And even though you don't have to, it's still an interesting film.
Apparently, I love those kind of things. I love when I'm watching a movie I've seen like 4 or 5 times, and I go, wait, what was that? I've never seen that before. I saw Hell or High Water again, and so great. And
awesome.
It's so great. And there were so many things that just killed you to say that, didn't it?
No, I'm glad you enjoy movies.
Oh my God, it's so well done. Oh, for the first 5 minutes though, I had to shrug off Josh and his dislike for this movie, because I kept thinking, I can see why he doesn't like this movie. And I was like, okay, stop. But anyway, the reason why I bring that up is because there's a lot of things I've never noticed. And I've seen that movie like 4 or 5 times. I never noticed all of the posters that say debt relief. I never noticed all of the foreclosure signs. I never noticed all the textures behind, of course, because you're watching it for a completely different reason. By the way, when you go to Wikipedia and put number 42 in it, there's 1,000 different references to the number 42. Not 1,000. There's a lot of different references to the number 42 in different religions. In Japanese culture, it's considered an unlucky number. There's in Egyptian mythology, 42 questions asked of a person making their journey through death. There's a thing about Kabbalah. There's a thing about Christianity, Judaism. The number 42 actually is prominent in all of these beliefs. So obviously that's intentional. Why they wanted to put it in there is probably because of all of those reasons. All of those reasons. I love when people do things like that, because I did notice the 42 on the spider, but it didn't register. I kept thinking it was something else, like it was some kind of symbol. It didn't register as 4 and 2. And then I did notice the numbers on the ground after he hits the sign, the 4 and the 2. And I thought, I'm wondering what that means. I know it can't be just coincidental that they chose to put a 4 and a 2 there. And they're kind of not close to each other. So you can't really tell, is it supposed to be 24 or 42? Obviously it's 42 because it's referenced other places, but yeah, I'm sure there's thousands of different reasons why they put it in that film, and I'm sure somebody out there knows this. I'm curious why you keep calling it a kids movie. Do you think it was intentionally made for kids because it's Spider-Man, or have we crossed that boundary where there's a generation of people who grew up on comics are now making movies, so they're not necessarily just making it for young people, because to me it didn't seem like a kids movie. I know why you're saying that because it's animated and it's Spider-Man, but it has a maturity about it that no doubt you can bring your children. No doubt it's completely appropriate
Yeah.
on a whole bunch of different levels. Although it is PG, I guess maybe because of the violence.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but so I'm curious: is that not necessarily a good thing or not necessarily a bad thing that you call it a kids movie?
Well, no, I mean, I think okay. So I think for me, especially, and maybe now, just so acutely, there's so many movies I need to see right now that it's like, am I gonna go right back, turn right back around and watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse again? No, I'm not going to. But that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like if it's on, I could totally see like if it's on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, and it's just there and it's right there and it's one click away and I can just like hit it and put it on and have it in the background. That it seems like a good like background movie to me. And I don't have any kids, and I can imagine how certain movies can get grating as the kids like watch it over and over again. My sister watched Return of Jafar constantly for months. Like multiple times a night she watched it. This is like a full feature-length movie, and it was like the Aladdin 2 essentially. It's the one without Robin Williams. They did 3 Aladdins. 2 of them had Robin Williams in them. She watched the second one without Robin Williams for like, I don't know, it was like 40 days straight. It was insane. And so like that movie just, it would grate on you. And so this movie, I would hope, has a little bit more to it and is a little bit better to maybe parents can handle having it on the background more. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking. I'm hoping it's not a Frozen situation or something where it's just like you just want to bash your head against a wall every time you hear whatever that song is. See, that's the good thing. I don't know what that song is.
Whatever that song is. Well, you obviously don't have children because you would know it was Let It Go.
Let It Go, yeah. Okay.
Here's the thing. I am so envious of children that they can do that, because when I was growing up, back in the day, I had to walk up 3 fields of corn and backtrack to watch the video. No, the movies would come on once a year, and that's it. So Mary Poppins was a once-a-year event. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was a once-a-year event. Wizard of Oz, all of the Rankin Bass stuff for Christmas, Year Without a Santa Claus, was a once-a-year event. So when my nephew was watching Hotel Transylvania in the middle of June or whenever he was watching it, I don't even think that's what it was. It's some kind of Halloween movie, Scooby-Doo and Halloween. I have no idea. In June, yeah, I could let it get on my nerves, but because he watched it all the time. But I kept thinking to myself, wouldn't I do the same thing if I could watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang over and over and over again? I would so do it. Well, see,
I did it with Top Gun. I did it with, with Temple of Doom. I mean, I would just like constantly watch these movies over and over and over and over again. And so I don't know. I mean, I understand why somebody would do that, but I can imagine that, the better the movie is, the easier it is to have it on the background. So that's just
I guess that's a valid point. And this is a very, very textured, layered film. So it's definitely going to win the Oscar. It's in line to win the Oscar.
Right.
I think it deserves to win the Oscar, but I don't really see the animated films as much as I see the other ones. Mm-hmm. If I could get it in, if I had time, like we talked about in the beginning of the podcast and the unlimited funds, I would go see all the animated features. One year I was actually in Boston where they showed all of the animated shorts and I got to see all of those, and I actually could pick which was my favorite. And so when they introduced them on the Oscars, I was like, oh yeah, I have a reference to this. And so maybe that's why the Academy is trying to do all these wonky things with the telecast. They're trying to do all the technical awards during the commercial break.
Cinematographer is going to be during the commercial break.
Whatever.
Yes,
that is
dumb.
so stupid.
That's dumb.
It is ridiculous. It is not the point of the Academy Awards. If you're watching it and you're bored by the cinematographer, go get some freaking Doritos, because there are people out there who grew up wanting to know that information. And I was one of them, and I still am one of them. I still learn about new things because of the foreign language films that I didn't get a chance to see all of them. Now I have a list of where to start with something like that. But did you hear this new thing where they're not going to allow last year's winners to give out this year's winners Oscars?
I didn't know
So
that.
it's a yeah, it's been a tradition since I can remember,
Mhm.
where Best Supporting Actress from last year, Allison Janney, will give out Best Supporting Actor for this year, and so forth and so on. And whenever anybody's unavailable, they just have somebody step in, and usually they're unavailable because they're filming or they're out of the state or whatever. But they're actually not going to do that tradition this year. At least that's what the talk of it is. So the point to all of that is that I don't get a chance to see all of the animated feature films, but this one just feels special. This Spider-Man film feels special. They went bold, they went big, they did a lot of illogical things. You weren't supposed to combine these stories and get the result that they got. They put a Spider-Man pig in there and it works. It's it's cute, but at the same time it's like, don't mess with him, because like you never mess with those characters. Batmite is the Batman version of Spider-Ham. And he used to get on my nerves when he was a kid because I was like, you're not taking Batman seriously with Batmite. And then I saw there's a TV show called The Brave and the Bold, which is kind of a modern day take on Batman, but done sort of like the 1960s version. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's taken seriously. And they introduce all of these side characters, and they introduce Batmite, and it was a really clever story. And I was like, okay, I get it. I didn't want to have anything to do with him when I was growing up and reading comic books and stuff like that. He might have come before my time or after my time too. But anyway, the point to that is that this film throws a lot of things into the mix, and it just shouldn't work. It just shouldn't work. And back to the whole idea that there's a subplot about love, but it's about finding love and confidence in yourself, not about boy-girl love. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they don't turn Spider-Gwen and Morales into romantic interest with each other, which I thought was great, because that would be what you would traditionally do.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that they didn't do that, I thought was brave. The female character is there to kick ass, not to be the romantic character for the lead character. She's not the ingenue. She's a Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, it might go unnoticed to most people, but it's pretty revolutionary that they didn't. There's no flirting. There's no like, you're cute. There's nothing. There is the awkward, puberty scene where his hand sticks to her hair, which is hilarious because then, you get that great joke. Nice hair. Shut up. You don't get to comment on my hair, but her hair does look cool that it's shaved on the side like that. So there is that awkward, but that scene's more about being an awkward teenager in a situation. It's as awkward for her as it is for him. It's not necessarily about a crush and a love affair and all that other stuff. And it's also setting you up for her to actually be one of the smartest ones in this new universe, because what does she do? She gets pulled to that school and goes undercover. So she's actually developing a storyline even before you know that she's who she is. Really well done. Really well done.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't say much more about it other than it's a really fun movie. It's epic. It's emotionally grounded in some really great stuff. When Aunt May sees Peter Parker again, even though it's not her Peter Parker, that's fantastic. That's done. The fact that Aunt May is a kick-ass character too is great. Like, it's about time, she says to him later on when he finally comes to terms with everything that he is. And the fact that she knows where his, spider cave is, if you will. And there's stuff in that cave or that underground bunker that I'm not sure if it was meant to be what it is, but to me, it reminded me of stuff that only somebody who collected action figures would know about. There's like a spider mobile,
Yes.
but it's more like a dune buggy,
Yep.
which is exactly what he had when I was growing up with the Miko dolls. He had this like weird dune buggy. When I was a kid, I was always like, okay, so Batman has a car, so now everybody has to have a car. And Green Arrow had a elongated looking car where arrows shot out of the front of it, and Spider-Man had this like web that flew off the back of it, kind of scooped over. I think it was like a almost on an arm, and it came over top and it would capture the villain, stuff like that. But I would like, why does Spider-Man need a dune buggy? That's stupid.
To get you to
But
buy it.
I would love to have that. Yeah, totally. I would love to have that dune buggy now. And when I saw that dune buggy that looked like that in, the Spider-Man, whatever you call it, cave
lair,
or underground bunker lair. Yeah. I didn't want to say lair because I just didn't seem right for some reason. Anyway, bunker. I got excited. I was like, that's his dune buggy, like a little freaking dork. I was like, okay, obviously that dune buggy wasn't as bad as I thought it was, because I was super excited to see it. And so there's these little touches in there for people like me, and I'm sure it's even more intense for people who actually followed Spider-Man, read Spider-Man, and actually know the legend and actually know his whole story. So it just must be immensely fun for people like that. And it's going to be a lot of fun to backtrack references like we just did on the podcast, 42 and all that other stuff. It's going to be fun to backtrack and figure out, and how are they going to blend this into the MCU? Are they going to? Is it going to count? I mean, I don't know. It could, but we'll see. So overall, it's just a fun ride. You're right. It's a fun popcorn movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great experience.
All right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer and tweet us at actorengineer. We'll see you next time.